Yeah, good evening. It's great to be here, and it's a privilege to kick off our today's aperitivo. Before I dive into my topic, I will, in the spirit of the aperitivo, introduce my drink. I have today a Bavarian beer, of course, talking to you live from Munich, but not the usual Bavarian lager, a Helles, but a Bavarian Pilsner. So, cheers. Yeah, as you already can tell from the title, I will talk about the two recent and only decisions of the UPC concerning FRAND and SEP. This is a tie-in to our last topic at the last aperitivo in November, which was held by my colleague Julian Wurmser, and I will build on this. Before we start, I would like to briefly explain for all you what is an SEP and FRAND. So SEPs are standard essential patents. This means these are patents which are part of a standardized technology like Wi-Fi or 5G. This means that the teaching of the patent can be found in the standard, which also means then that if you're using this standard, for example, Wi-Fi, you automatically will also use the patent. This puts the holder of such an SEP in the position that he can actually bar the block the access to the technology. He has the patent. If he doesn't give anyone a license, no one can use Wi-Fi because one patent or several patents would block this. This is all, of course, then a problem with competition law and antitrust, and therefore such a patent holder needs to grant everyone who's interested a so-called FRAND license. So a license on fair, reasonable, non-discriminatory terms. In this regard, the European Court of Justice handed down in 2015 the leading decision in this regard, the Huawei versus ZTE decision, in which it provided guidelines on how the parties should conduct each other in FRAND negotiations, probably prior to litigation. This is also referred as the so-called FRAND dance. All right, let's dive into the decisions. So the first decision was in November 22nd at the local division Mannheim between Panasonic and Oppo concerning LTE patents. Then just a few weeks later, the Munich local division also handed down its first SEP FRAND decision between Huawei and Netgear concerning Wi-Fi 6. Both courts rejected the FRAND defense and granted clear-cut injunctions. In the Mannheim case, the court found that Oppo's counteroffer was not FRAND, and therefore the FRAND defense had to fail. In Munich, the court was of the opinion that Netgear did not show that Huawei had a sufficient dominant market position as the SEP holder. And also, Netgear did not provide any security at any point of the proceedings, which is required in the FRAND dance of the ECJ. So, in a nutshell, both courts agree in every matter that in every aspect that matters. So there was not much difference between the two decisions. Their take on the FRAND defense is generally a mild variation of the German case law established by the German Federal Court of Justice, the Bundesgerichtshof, BGH, in their two Siswell versus Haier decisions of 2020. The basic idea of these decisions is that the implementer has to act constructively throughout the course of the negotiations, and its respective behavior must always be considered an overall assessment. This also includes the behavior of the SEP holders to some degree. In a recent pending German national litigation, actually here in Munich at the Higher Regional Court in Munich, appeal proceedings currently between VoiceH and HMD, the European Commission has filed an amicus curiae brief giving their actual opinion on how the FRAND dance should be understood and concluded. Interestingly, both the Mannheim and the Munich courts did not agree and actually rejected this strictly formalistic step-by-step approach with the European Commission proposed in its amicus curiae brief. Particularly, this was that the infringement notice of the implementer of the SEP holder must contain all required information, and that a non-friend royalty demand, so a license offer of the SEP holder, if this would not be FRAND, then he cannot obtain an injunction in the later litigation. Both courts agree that for the implementer's willingness, it must be viewed on the balance of the overall course of the negotiations and the implementer's respective behavior. The courts are focusing clearly on the overall conduct of the parties, and they put their main emphasis on the last offer that could be accepted. So in such a FRAND and SEP negotiations, the parties will ping pong back and forward several license offers negotiations. So there is usually not the one single offer and counter offer, but the courts will only take a closer look on the last ones. If the implementer has misunderstandings or objections to the license offer or the proposed license agreement, he needs to address these objections immediately and cannot wait to only address them during the litigation at a later stage. This would then be too late. Also, in compliance with the established German case law, the court understands that FRAND is a range or corridor of acceptable rates. So there is not the one single FRAND rate, but this is actually most of the courts in Europe have the same understanding. In this range, the SEP holder is not required to offer the lowest range within this, the lowest rate within this corridor or range. So he can, if the range has an upper and a lower part, he can offer in the upper range of the corridor. Okay. So the only main difference between the two decisions and their understanding is that the Munich court requires that the implementer's counteroffer has to be FRAND, regardless of the initial offer of the SEP holder. This means the Munich court will not assess an offer of an SEP holder if the later counteroffer is already not FRAND. This is different at the Mannheim court, and actually also in the proposed procedure from the European European Commission. They both state that also the SEP holder's initial offer has to be assessed whether it's FRAND or not, and this can also have then an effect on the FRAND defense and their merits. Finally, the Munich court made clear that the SEP holder is free and is therefore meeting his obligations to only offer a pool license. So often a group of SEP holders come together and form a patent pool, so that you can get a lot of Wi-Fi 6 patents, for example, from one stop with a one-stop shop at one pool. And this is acceptable, and a interested licensee implementer has to accept this. So he's not entitled to ask only for a bilateral offer from one of the SEP holders. Okay, so what's our takeaway from these two decisions? First of all, we only have now two decisions from two courts, only two German courts. So it will be interesting to see, for example, how the other third big court in Germany, the local division Düsseldorf, will act on this and decide on this, whether to take their own stand, their own ideas, or if they concur with the findings of Mannheim München, and of course also how other European courts will decide on potential SEP and FRAND cases. Interestingly, although there's very complex FRAND defense has mostly a lot of volume and it's difficult and comprehensive, the court managed to hand down its decision almost in the desired time frame of 1 year. So it was around 16 months. The question is whether this is for which side is an advantage? Is an advantage for the SEP holder who gets his injunction rather quickly, so he can have in less than 18 months and 1.5 years, he gets an injunction on his SEP. On the other hand, we know that SEP holders, in particular patent trolls, are actually at least to some degree, are benefit from longer proceedings because this always stirs up some disruption in the business of the implementer. So long proceedings with uncertainty for the customers of the implementer, this can be helpful. On the other hand, now the implementer at least has within a year, a little more than a year, some way of legal certainty on whether he is infringing or not the potential SEPs and has to take a license or not. Unfortunately, both German cases, Mannheim, Munich, are already settled, so we won't see an appeal in these proceedings. So we still have to wait on how the Court of Appeal might see things differently. So I'm already at my end. Some advice maybe for potential implementers. We only can recommend to you to closely monitor potential infringing SEPs or also litigation for technology which you might also be involved in. And then if you can identify some SEPs which might be harmful, try to file oppositions or nullity actions right away. Also, if you're maybe not in litigation already, because this could help you later a lot due to the tight schedule of the UPC. Thank you very much.